Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. Happy Wellness Wednesday. There I am. Lighting was a little weird this morning, so it took me a little longer to get on. If you are just stumbling on my page, my name is Donna. I am a mom. I am a nana. I am a runner, jazzerciser, grad school student. Yes, there's a lot going on here, but one of the things that I've learned in my lifelong battle with depression and anxiety is that sharing tips with others often helps. Also known in the NAMI front as peer wisdom. If you've ever been in a peer support group, you understand how helpful it can be. So I felt led to start this Wellness Wednesday. Good morning, Stacy. A little over a year ago, actually now, to share my parts of my journey and tips and things that I learn. I'm constantly learning in grad school to study for my Master of Science in Clinical Mental Health Counseling. So I'm back on like the double learning right now. But I love to learn. I'm always learning something, and I love to share that when I think it will help others. And I encourage you during Wellness Wednesday to make comments, ask questions, whatever, if you have something to share that might also help with whatever topic we're talking about. So with that said, Wellness Wednesday often ends up digging into mindset, because mindset, it turns out, is really a lot behind everything we do. Last week, we lightened it up a little bit with a chat about the effects of diet on mental health in kids and adolescents. If you're interested in that and you didn't see it, let me know. I will tag you in the comments of that video, or you can go to my video tab on my page and find it. But today we're going to go back to the mindset with a cool technique I learned in a class I took recently. And it's called reverse brainstorming. Have you heard of it? I had not heard of reverse brainstorming until a couple of months ago. Now it's also been, it's similar concepts or same concepts have also been referred to as, good morning, Miss Stacy, if I didn't say good morning already. Similar, all right, let's try that again. So it's also been known as reverse thinking, reverse engineering, or inversion technique. These are not all exactly the same, but they are very similar. So we're gonna touch a little bit on a couple of those. And I forgot to say that if you're here, let me know you're here so I can say hi. And if you're not here, if you don't see this till afterwards, hit hashtag replay in the comments so that I know you saw it. And again, don't be afraid to drop comments if it has to do with the topic and what we're talking about. Good morning, Miss Tina. And if I don't see your question or your comment, or say anything about it, it's because Facebook didn't show it to me, and I'll definitely see it when I'm done and respond. Okay, so what is reverse brainstorming? Well, like I said, it's also known as reverse thinking, reverse engineering, although reverse engineering is a slightly different animal. And I'll give you an example of that, or inversion technique. But how I learned the technique was it was referred to as reverse brainstorming. So brainstorming helps people think creatively. Now that I think I have my have my mouth warmed up here, brainstorming helps people think creatively, but it is most often only talked about in a group or team setting. It is also a tool that can be used in business or individually. It's actually a method to take advantage. Are you ready for this? To take advantage of the negative thinking that humans have a tendency to do. We have a tendency to think of problems before we think of solutions. And that's kind of, reverse brainstorming kind of harnesses that and puts it to good, positive use. So if that sounds a little bit different than anything you've ever heard before, that's what makes it exciting. So how do you do it? Instead of asking how you solve a problem, you find ways that you could make it worse and then reverse the statements. Now, if you're listening to me and you're thinking, listen, Donna, I always find a way to make things worse, then you're forgetting the reverse the statements part, right? So I thought this was really cool, and I really didn't understand how it worked. And I hope the example we had when we learned it was fantastic, but I hopefully found some other ones that'll help drive it home a little bit more. So how do you do it? Well, you write your statement. Number one, you write your problem or challenge down as specifically as possible. Did I mention you might want to have a notebook handy? So grab a piece of paper and a pen, or listen and then come back and listen again when you have those things. So write your problem or challenge down as specifically as possible. And then you write down the opposite of that challenge or problem. And then you brainstorm ideas to support the opposite, because again, we have a tendency to gravitate towards negative thinking, and we have a tendency to look for problems instead of solutions. So this is kind of a way to harness that. So you're going to brainstorm ideas to support the opposite of the problem or challenge. And I'll give you some examples in just a minute. And then you're going to look for a solution in those reversals. So what does this look like? So here's a personal example. You're deathly afraid of the spider on the wall. So you've got a spider on the wall, you need to get rid of it. So you're going to reverse that, and you're going to think of ways that you might keep the spider there. And this is a strange example and probably not one you would use this for, but it works for the purpose. So you're deathly afraid of the spider on the wall. You want to devise a plan to deal with the spider safely. So you can make some notes. Obviously, you have a spider on the wall. You might not do this right away, but for the next time, you just had a spider on your wall. It freaked you out, disappeared, you lost it. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I can't find it. I know it's in this house somewhere. You feel me. I know some of you feel me. So you're going to sit down and you're going to write a list. You're going to write down your problem. There's a spider on the wall. I lost it. Now I can't find it. Whatever the case may be. Be as specific as possible. And then you're going to write down the opposite. So if the problem is that you need to get rid of the spider that's on the wall before you lose it, what is the opposite of the problem? And then you're going to start writing down, you're going to start brainstorming things that support the opposite of the problem. So as you can see, and if you think about it for a minute, this could get pretty silly. Like you're deathly afraid of the spider on the wall and you want to get rid of it. So the opposite of that is what? It's you love the spider on the wall and you want to keep it. So you can see how by flipping this a little bit, it can take on a little bit of a humorous nature. And then you start devising plans. How would you invite the spider to stay? How would you love the spider? How would you be okay with the spider? And then you can reverse those statements to find a way to keep the spider away and keep from getting the spider on your wall again. So that's a very, very simple terms example. So let's try another one. You're terrified of traveling to another country, but you have these awesome tickets, or a friend invited you to go or whatever. So I had a similar experience when I was going to Cancun several years ago, where I was fine. I was excited about the trip, y'all. I was so excited. And then I read some reviews on the hotel about some of the things that supposedly go on in other countries, not just Cancun, but other countries. And I was terrified. I was absolutely terrified. I was convinced I was not coming back from Mexico with my life. I was absolutely convinced. That was an extremely high anxiety time for me. And I just was, for whatever reason, I was really feeling my mortality. Some of these reviews had me scared. The threat level of traveling to that area wasn't really bad, but it had recently been elevated slightly, and I didn't really understand what all that meant. So I was just terrified. So you're terrified of traveling to another country. The reverse of that might be that you sit down and you think of all of the reasons why you would love to travel to that country. This is a much better example, I think, than the spider. You might sit down and think about all the reasons you would love to travel to that country, all the things you want to learn about the country, all the things, in my case, in the Cancun trip, all the things that you would need to do to protect yourself so you could have maximum enjoyment of your trip. And that's ultimately after I had my tiny little meltdown I don't know, not even 7 days, 5 days before we went to Cancun. That's essentially what I did. Was I sat down and I looked at all the great things that were going to come and that were happening because of this trip, and how excited I was, and all the things I was going to see, and how it was going to help me struggle through my fear and my social anxiety once again. And I wrote all of those down. So I looked at the reversal of what I was feeling. I looked and this is kind of like a reverse thinking type thing. So I looked at the reversal of what I was feeling, and I looked for solutions in the reversals. So I reversed what I was feeling. I was like, I can't go. This is where I was at. I was like, I can't go. Something's going to happen. What if this happens? What if that happens? Does this sound like any familiar context, you know? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if something happens to me while I'm gone and I don't come back? What's going to happen to my house? What's going to happen to my daughter? All this crazy stuff. I mean, my brain was literally spinning. So I had to sit down and look at the positive. In this case, reversing the negative was really reversing the negative instead of reversing to a negative state, if that makes any sense. So in this case, I had to sit down, and my problem was I was scared. So I had to consider what would make me not scared and how not to be scared. And what I ended up doing was I ended up, for the first time in my life, in my early 40s, finally doing some end-of-life paperwork. It made me feel a little bit better. It made me feel a little more in control. Purchased some life insurance. Focused on the things that I could control instead of the things that I could not have any control over whatsoever. Told my friends about how my behavior was typically if they saw me doing anything like stripping my clothes off or running off with some strange guy, that wasn't me, and that meant something was wrong, and that they should get me out of there right away. Good morning, Miss Paisley. So that's kind of an example of how that personal reverse thinking or reverse brainstorming can work. So I sat down and focused on my fears, actually, and then found ways to deal with those fears. So another great example, and this is a goal-oriented, this is actually an example of reverse engineering, which is a little bit different, but same kind of concept. So and one example is, I don't know what to study to get a good job. So you pick the job you want, you research the education path that leads you to it. So you're kind of working backwards there. Another example is, I have an online boutique and I want to make X dollars per month. So let's say I want to make $500 a month. So to reverse that, I have to figure out how many leggings I need to sell to reach that goal. And that breaks it down. It breaks it down into a manageable piece. How many leggings per month? How many leggings does that equal per day? Etc. So same kind of idea. So that's an example of reverse engineering, which is a very similar concept. Good morning, Patricia. Very similar concept, but just a little bit different. Reverse engineer is a little bit more goal engineered, whereas the other examples I gave you of the trip to Cancun and the spider on the wall is more about reversing the thinking and flipping the negative to handle a problem or a challenge you have at the time. So a business example, I have a great business example where this works for brick and mortar businesses or any kind of business really. And that is the health clinic. The health clinic team starts out, and this is an example of how this can be used for group or team building. The health clinic team wants to know how they can improve satisfaction. Maybe they've had a few complaints. Maybe they're not sure their customers are satisfied. So they want to know how they can improve patient satisfaction. And this example came from mindtools.com. So the leader for the health team meeting says, how do we improve patient satisfaction? So she reverses the problem and statement and says, how do we make patients more dissatisfied? Good morning, Miss Kayla. So as soon as you reframe that question that way, you start to see a whole new angle, right? So what are reverse ideas of I just lost my place. How to improve patient satisfaction? The new one was, how do we make patients more dissatisfied? We book double appointments, right? We remove the chairs from the waiting room. We put patients on hold and forget about them on purpose. We have patients wait outside in their parked car. And we put patients who need an appointment on a 6-week waiting list, whether we really have one or not. So those are reverse ways. So again, the problem was she reverses the problem statement by saying, the original statement was, how do we increase patient satisfaction? The new statement was, how do we make patients more dissatisfied? And then they began the brainstorming with these reverse statements, which it accomplishes two things. Here's the bottom line. It accomplishes two things. It helps to move you outside of your normal box and helps you to look at it from a different angle. And it also sometimes adds some humor. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. So those are some examples. So there's a way that you can use reverse brainstorming personally if you're working on a challenge or a goal that you have. I had another great one that talked about kayaks and kind of reverse thinking and reverse brainstorming for learning how to kayak. So if that sounds like something that's interesting, let me know. I'll send you the link to that one. There's a lot of things that this can be applied to, but sometimes it takes a minute to be like, oh, okay, I can make this work here. I think my favorite one was probably, besides the trip to Cancun, was probably the example of if you don't know what the reverse engineering example, which is if you don't know what to study to get a good job, then you pick the job you want and learn what to study to get there, right? So there's lots of great examples here, but bottom line is it's a great way to start retraining your brain. I talk about that all the time. Our brains are very plastic. I could probably do content for days on neuroplasticity because I find it so fascinating and I believe it. I believe that I'm a walking example of how neuroplasticity works. But it is a great way to start retraining your plastic brain. It can help you uncover hidden assumptions or beliefs that you have about the problem. And let me tell you something, I could probably use to uncover some hidden assumptions or beliefs I have about spiders. We'll just say that. I'm just going to throw that out there. It forces you to think outside of the box. You may find that you actually get quite exhausted with coming up with problems and feel more driven to find solutions. So this is kind of like a smack of reverse psychology here, where at once upon a time, authoritarian parents believed that if they gave you a really hard time and made you feel like you weren't capable of something, you would work harder to become that something. And for the right person with the right type of wiring, that may have worked to some extent, but it also had a profound negative effect. So you may find, for the same reason, you may find that you just get exhausted with coming up with problems and that you're like, oh my gosh, I've been in a situation where we had to come up with ideas, and every time we would throw out an idea, somebody else in the group would be like, oh, well, that won't work. Well, that won't work. And you get to the point where you're like, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? Something has to work. Something's going to work. We need to figure it out. And that's what I mean by that even though that you'll get exhausted with coming up with problems and you'll get tired. Honestly, no matter how negative you are, you'll find a breaking point where you get tired of coming up with problems and it will drive you to start looking for solutions. Silly items will undoubtedly come up. Just in the description of the spider, that's a great example. So the reverse of the problem is how can you love the spider? How can you invite the spider to stay? Or in the case of increasing patient satisfaction, how do you make patients more dissatisfied, which is double book appointments and remove the chairs from the waiting room. So as you can see, some of these reverse statements, good morning, Miss Carla. Did I say good morning, Kayla? So as you can see, some of the statements can get pretty silly right out of the gate when you start coming up with ways to support with ideas to support the reverse item. It can get a little crazy, like, when you say remove the chairs from the waiting room, you're like, who's going to actually do that, right? So it starts getting silly. And we need to embrace that because sometimes when that silly stuff starts coming up, it makes us laugh at the problem. It makes us laugh at ourselves. And we've already talked about many times over, and most recently, how humor helps us relax and reduce anxiety. Good morning, Miss Robin. So the silly items will come up, and that's part of the fun about this whole reverse brainstorming thing is you are bound, especially if you're in a group setting, but even if you're by yourself doing it, you are bound to come up with some silly, crazy items to support the reverse of your problem. And as such, good morning, Miss Ann. Good morning, Miss Betty. And as such, you're going to end up laughing. You're going to end up laughing, and you're going to end up starting to relax about the problem a little bit, which means that it's going to even open your mind and change the angle and the perspective with which you're looking at it even more. So embrace those moments because we already know that those silly, humorous moments help to reduce that anxiety and might actually help to just get things moving and get the real ideas moving better. So finally, changing or flipping the script is going to lead to better long-term thinking. And the trip to Cancun, the spider example, those are some of what I'm talking about. When you do that, flipping the script, that reverse brainstorming, reverse thinking, whatever you want to call it on any given day, inversion thinking, when you do that often enough, your brain starts to prune connections that you don't use anymore. That's part of neuroplasticity. So doing that often enough is going to eventually lead you to better long-term thinking, and you're going to find you don't have to do that because you're going to jump to positive solutions a little faster, and you're going to spend less time on the negative. So it does help to lead to better long-term thinking, and the less likely you are to jump to that negative thinking, or the more likely you are to jump to the positive first, the more your brain is going to prune those connections that lead to that negative thinking. And then you don't use those as much or anymore. So reverse brainstorming, it absolutely works, absolutely has potential to change the way you think, whether you're using it in a personal setting or a group setting, team setting. It's a great icebreaker. The example that I learned with, and it was a NAMI class I was taking, was how to make, the problem was how to help people find the broccoli easier. And then the reverse of that, of course, was how to make it very difficult or make it impossible for the customers to find the broccoli. And having come from a grocery store background, for whatever reason, this example really resonated with me. So maybe I should have used it here. Maybe I should have given you this example. So it was how to make the broccoli impossible to find or more difficult to find was the reverse. And then we started looking, it was a group of us, probably about 8 of us. And then we started looking at ways to make the broccoli more difficult to find. And I don't need to tell you that some of these methods, it just hilarity ensued. It became funny. It became humorous. We were dying laughing. But what happens? What happens when you're laughing and you're having a good time? It changes the way you're thinking. It changes that negativity. It relaxes your muscles. It gets the serotonin moving, the dopamine, all those endorphins. And laughter is good for us. We know it reduces the anxiety. So all this hilarity ensued while we came up with these crazy ways to hide the broccoli in the grocery store. Hide the broccoli. And I can't actually remember any of the things we came up with now, but then our task was to reverse those ways to hide, and they would become ways to make the broccoli more visible. So maybe I should have just started out with that example, but that's the one that resonated with me because of years working in the retail grocery industry. But it was amazing to see it in action, and I've used it once or twice since then. So whether it's reverse brainstorming, whether it's reverse thinking, and I think reverse thinking is the term that's more often used in individuals when you're talking about individuals that are facing a challenge or a problem or just a goal they want to achieve. This is a really great way to do it. The reverse engineering is a little more goal-oriented and kind of teaches you how to break everything down backwards to its smallest, good morning, Dawn, to its smallest little component so that you can figure it out. But it's definitely a way to get out of the normal box, look at things a little bit differently, change the perspective a little bit differently. And you will find over time, because of that neuroplasticity, that the more you practice this, the more you will find yourself focusing on the positive because you don't need those negative little branches anymore. Okay, so I hope you found that helpful. A little bit shorter than usual, but it was some great examples. I'm going to invite you to remember these final lessons about the reverse thinking, reverse brainstorming concept. Use it cautiously and make sure that your end focus is on the reversal, the positive part. In other words, don't get stuck on the negative side. So when we're already negative, we have a tendency to kind of get stuck and rooted in there. So if we're freaking out because we think we're going to die when we go to Cancun, it can be easy to get kind of stuck in that and swim in that. And I did for a couple days. I'm not going to lie. But oftentimes when you sit down and start focusing on the reversal of your problem, again, sooner or later, something silly and something crazy is going to come up. And you're either going to start laughing and you're going to start relaxing, or you're going to come up with an awesome solution right away. So stick to the positive part. So even if you're a little bit negative and you're starting to focus on that reverse, I'm in college, for example. I want to go to college. So what's the reverse? I don't go to college. And sometimes that negative brainstorming that would come along with that would be like, how do I prevent myself from going to college? Well, I could become homeless. I can't even think of examples of that right now. The broccoli example was easier, but you get the idea. You can kind of get stuck in that negative if you're not careful. So remember the end goal. Use this with caution, and remember the end goal, which is to reverse it and get to those positive points. Don't get stuck on that negative brainstorming and forget to reverse the script. Don't be afraid to have fun with it. It will put things in better perspective. I promise. And it's a great technique. The final thing for you to learn is that it's a great technique for when you feel stuck or in a rut. And as I mentioned in the beginning, it is a fabulous business and team building tool as well. So this can be applied in a lot of different ways. Probably takes a little practice, but at some point or another, we all had somebody, a teacher, a parent, a mentor, somebody that sat down with us when we were talking to them about a problem and said, okay, let's brainstorm this. What's the pros? What's the cons? And this is the same idea. It's just a little bit of a different look at it. So reverse brainstorming, reverse thinking, reverse engineering, all of those can be a little helpful. I gave you some examples of how they differ a little bit and how they're the same. And I really hope that you find this helpful and that you're able to implement it in the near future. If you are, I would love to hear about it, especially if it's successful. But even if it's not, I would love to hear about it. If you apply it to something and you find that it works really well. And if you have more questions about it, don't hesitate to ask. Like I said, a lot of the resources available focus on business rather than the individual, but there are amazing ways that you can put reverse thinking into action with your own goals, reverse engineering as well. So don't be afraid to ask if you have questions. I hope you enjoyed this. If you found it helpful, please feel free to share. And I'm not sure what we're going to talk about next week, but I have a couple of irons in the fire on that. And of course, I will always announce it the day before. But if you have any questions or if you'd like to see the link to some of the things that I was looking at when I worked on this, let me know. I will send them to you. And I hope you have a fabulous day. I will see you next Wednesday. And in the meantime, be well. Bye.